Dawn broke over the frozen highways of eastern Ukraine, casting long shadows across what should have been empty asphalt. But the roads weren't empty. A serpentine column of Russian military vehicles stretched for miles, carrying enough ammunition to fuel an entire offensive. $400 million worth of shells, rockets, and explosives moving toward the front lines under the pale morning light. The convoy commanders felt untouchable, protected by layers of air defense and electronic warfare systems that had never failed them before. They were wrong. At exactly 602 hours, the lead vehicle simply vanished. No warning, no incoming missile streak across the sky, just a brilliant flash that turned steel and concrete into vapor. Within 18 seconds, the entire convoy had been erased from existence, leaving nothing but burning craters and twisted metal scattered across 12 kilometers of highway. The question isn't how Ukraine managed to destroy such a heavily defended target. The question is what happened in the hours that followed, when Moscow realized their southern strategy had just collapsed in a single devastating blow. You're about to witness the most sophisticated military operation of the modern era, one that didn't rely on overwhelming firepower or advanced technology. Instead, it succeeded through something far more dangerous: patience, precision, and the quiet exploitation of human nature itself. Because while Russia spent billions building defenses against missiles and aircraft, Ukraine found a weapon they never saw coming: time. This convoy wasn't just another supply run. It represented the cornerstone of Russia's winter offensive, a carefully orchestrated movement of ammunition that would determine the fate of 3 separate front lines. Intelligence reports suggested the cargo included over 40,000 artillery shells, 16,000 rockets, and enough explosive materials to sustain combat operations for 6 weeks. The loss of this shipment wouldn't just delay Russian plans, it would cripple them entirely. But destroying a convoy of this magnitude required more than luck or a lucky missile strike. Ukrainian planners had been tracking this specific shipment for weeks, analyzing patterns, studying routines, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. They knew the convoy's route, its schedule, even the radio frequencies used by its escort vehicles. Every detail had been cataloged, every weakness identified and exploited with surgical precision. The operation began not with explosions, but with silence. 3 weeks before the convoy departed, Ukrainian intelligence teams infiltrated the supply depot where the ammunition was being staged. Not physically, but digitally, penetrating the facility's computer networks and embedding dormant code into the logistics systems. This wasn't sabotage in the traditional sense. It was something more subtle, more devastating. Information warfare designed to create the perfect conditions for a physical strike. Meanwhile, across the border in Ukrainian-controlled territory, engineering teams worked around the clock to prepare the battlefield. They weren't building bunkers or laying mines. Instead, they were constructing something that looked entirely innocent to satellite surveillance. Agricultural equipment, irrigation systems, even livestock shelters, all positioned along the convoy's projected route. But hidden within these seemingly harmless structures was the most advanced autonomous weapons network ever deployed in combat. The convoy itself moved with textbook precision, following protocols that had been refined through months of successful operations. Electronic warfare vehicles jammed GPS signals across a 50-kilometer radius. Air defense systems maintained overlapping coverage against aerial threats. Scout drones flew ahead of the main column, scanning for ambushes or roadside explosives. Every precaution had been taken, every vulnerability addressed. Except one. Russian doctrine assumes attacks come from outside their defensive perimeter. Missiles launched from distant positions, aircraft approaching from beyond radar range, ground forces advancing across open terrain. Their entire defensive philosophy is built around detecting and defeating external threats before they can reach critical targets. But Ukraine's weapon was already inside the perimeter, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the moment when confidence would override caution. At 0547 hours, the convoy passed the first trigger point. Sensors embedded in the roadway registered the weight and vibration signatures of the lead vehicles, confirming the target's identity and activating the next phase of the operation. 23 kilometers ahead, a series of irrigation pumps began operating on a modified schedule, their electric motors generating a specific electromagnetic signature that would mask the power-up sequence of hidden weapon systems. The convoy commander, monitoring radio traffic from his armored command vehicle, noted the routine agricultural activity but dismissed it as irrelevant. Farmers worked early hours, especially during harvest season. Nothing unusual about irrigation equipment running before dawn. His attention remained focused on the tactical displays showing clear skies and empty roads ahead. The electronic warfare screens showed no enemy signals, no indication of hostile activity anywhere along their route. But 30 meters beneath his vehicle's tracks, a fiber optic cable carried data at the speed of light. Information flowed between sensor nodes positioned every few hundred meters, creating a real-time picture of the convoy's composition, speed, and defensive posture. Each vehicle was identified and tracked, its position logged with centimeter precision. The network wasn't just observing the convoy, it was learning from it, adapting to its movements, and preparing for the moment when observation would become action. Ukrainian operators monitored the feed from a bunker complex built into a hillside 40 kilometers away. Their screens showed thermal signatures, electromagnetic emissions, and communication patterns that revealed more than the Russians realized they were broadcasting. Radio discipline was excellent, but radio discipline couldn't hide the heat signatures of engines or the distinctive electronic fingerprints of different vehicle types. Every piece of information was analyzed, categorized, and fed into targeting algorithms that had been refined through months of simulation and testing. The convoy's electronic warfare systems were impressive, capable of jamming communications and GPS signals across vast areas. But they were designed to disrupt wireless communications, not fiber optic networks. The cables carrying targeting data were immune to electronic interference, creating a command and control system that operated in complete radio silence. Ukrainian forces could coordinate their attack without transmitting a single electromagnetic signal. As the convoy approached the kill zone, automated systems began final preparations. Camouflaged launch platforms adjusted their angles based on real-time tracking data. Warheads armed themselves according to target-specific parameters. Timing sequences synchronized across multiple weapon systems, ensuring coordinated strikes that would overwhelm defensive systems through sheer volume and precision. The Russians never saw it coming because there was nothing to see until the moment impact became inevitable. The moment arrived with mathematical precision. At 0611 hours and 43 seconds, the convoy's lead reconnaissance drone detected what appeared to be a flock of birds taking flight from a wheat field 6 kilometers ahead. The operator dismissed it as natural wildlife behavior, adjusting his thermal scanner to filter out biological signatures. He never noticed that the birds were flying in perfect geometric formation, or that their wing beats generated no heat signature whatsoever. Those weren't birds. They were the first wave of Ukraine's response. Micro-drones no larger than sparrows, each carrying a specialized payload designed not to destroy, but to blind. Within 90 seconds, they would systematically disable every optical sensor, thermal camera, and targeting system protecting the convoy. But that was just the opening move in a sequence that had been choreographed down to the millisecond. Inside the convoy's mobile command center, Colonel Dmitry Volkov studied digital maps showing their progress along the predetermined route. 47 vehicles stretched behind him in disciplined formation, each loaded with enough firepower to level city blocks. His electronic warfare specialists reported clean spectrum scans. His air defense coordinators confirmed negative contacts on all search radars. Every indicator suggested routine transit through secure territory. The colonel had commanded similar convoys dozens of times without incident. His confidence wasn't misplaced arrogance, but professional competence earned through successful operations. Russian logistics doctrine emphasized layered security, redundant communications, and overwhelming defensive firepower. This convoy represented the culmination of that doctrine, a moving fortress capable of defending itself against any conventional threat. But conventional threats weren't what Ukraine had prepared. The first indication something was wrong came from the convoy's electronic warfare vehicle, positioned third in the formation. Specialist Alexei Petrov monitored emission signatures across multiple frequency bands, searching for enemy communications or targeting radars. His screens had remained clear throughout the night, showing only the expected background noise of civilian radio traffic and atmospheric interference. Then, at exactly 0612 hours, every screen went white. Not the gradual degradation of jamming or the characteristic patterns of electronic attack. Instead, a complete sensory overload that suggested his equipment had been physically compromised. Petrov's training kicked in immediately. He activated backup systems, switched to alternate frequencies, and began emergency diagnostic procedures. But every backup system failed within seconds, leaving him functionally blind in the electromagnetic spectrum. Similar failures cascaded throughout the convoy's defensive network. Thermal imaging systems displayed nothing but static. Optical cameras showed distorted images that made no tactical sense. Communication arrays maintained contact with each other, but couldn't reach external command networks. The convoy had become isolated inside a bubble of technological confusion, cut off from both surveillance and support. Colonel Volkov's first instinct was to halt the formation and assess the threat. But standard doctrine emphasized movement over static defense when facing electronic warfare attacks. Stopping the convoy would create a concentrated target for artillery or airstrikes. Better to maintain momentum and push through the affected area as quickly as possible. He ordered increased speed and tightened formation intervals. The convoy accelerated from 40 to 60 kilometers per hour, sacrificing some defensive coordination for rapid transit through what appeared to be an enemy jamming zone. Vehicle commanders maintained visual contact with adjacent units, while radio operators attempted to restore external communications. The weapons that destroyed the convoy weren't launched from distant positions or dropped from aircraft. They emerged from the Earth itself, rising through camouflaged hatches that had been invisible to satellite surveillance and reconnaissance drones. Each launch platform had been positioned based on months of analysis studying Russian convoy procedures, timing their activation to coincide with the moment when defensive systems would be overwhelmed and communication networks disrupted. Ukrainian engineers had learned from previous conflicts that traditional anti-armor weapons struggled against modern defensive systems. Active protection systems could intercept incoming missiles. Electronic warfare could disrupt guidance systems. Reactive armor could defeat shaped charges. But all these defenses assumed attacks would follow conventional trajectories and timing patterns. Instead, Ukraine developed something entirely different. Weapons that attacked from below, emerging through the road surface itself. Warheads that detonated in sequence rather than simultaneously, creating cascading effects that overwhelmed protective systems through coordination rather than raw power. Most importantly, a targeting system that didn't rely on external signals but operated through pre-programmed logic that couldn't be jammed or intercepted. The destruction began with surgical precision. The first warhead disabled the convoy's lead electronic warfare vehicle, eliminating its ability to coordinate defensive jamming. The second struck the primary communications truck, severing contact between individual vehicle commanders. The third and fourth targeted air defense systems, neutralizing the convoy's protection against aerial threats. Each strike was timed to create maximum disruption while preserving specific vehicles for intelligence gathering. Ukraine wasn't just destroying the convoy. They were harvesting information from its wreckage, capturing communication equipment, code books, and operational documents that would provide insight into Russian tactical procedures. Within 18 seconds, the convoy's organizational structure had collapsed entirely. Individual vehicles found themselves isolated, their crews unable to communicate with adjacent units or coordinate defensive responses. Some attempted to retreat while others pushed forward, creating confusion that made coordinated resistance impossible. The final phase of the attack exploited this chaos with devastating efficiency. As surviving vehicles scattered in different directions, they triggered additional weapons systems positioned along multiple escape routes. Ukraine had anticipated every possible response and prepared countermeasures for each scenario. There was no safe direction, no viable withdrawal option, no tactical decision that wouldn't lead directly into another carefully prepared killing zone. But the most devastating aspect of the operation wasn't the physical destruction. It was the psychological impact on Russian commanders who realized their most secure supply routes were no longer viable. If a convoy this heavily defended could be eliminated so completely, what did that mean for future logistics operations? How could they maintain offensive momentum when their supply lines had become death traps? The answer would reshape the entire conflict, but that realization was still hours away. First, Moscow had to discover what had happened to their missing convoy, and that investigation would reveal vulnerabilities they never knew existed. By 0800 hours, the highway was silent. Smoke drifted across empty asphalt where moments earlier, $400 million of military hardware had rolled toward the front lines. The convoy that was supposed to sustain Russia's winter offensive had been reduced to scattered debris and classified wreckage, leaving behind only questions that Moscow's commanders couldn't answer. This wasn't just the destruction of ammunition and equipment. It was the collapse of an entire strategic assumption. For months, Russian doctrine had relied on the belief that heavily defended convoys could move safely through contested territory. That layered air defenses, electronic warfare systems, and disciplined formation tactics could guarantee the survival of critical supply lines. Ukraine proved that assumption catastrophically wrong. The operation revealed something far more dangerous than advanced weapons or superior technology. It demonstrated that modern warfare belongs to those who can think differently, who can turn patience into a weapon and routine into vulnerability. While Russia spent billions building defenses against yesterday's threats, Ukraine was quietly preparing for tomorrow's battlefield. The real victory wasn't measured in destroyed vehicles or eliminated personnel. It was measured in the doubt that now infected every future Russian logistics operation. Every convoy route had become suspect. Every routine supply run carried the possibility of invisible weapons waiting beneath familiar roads. In modern conflict, the greatest weapon isn't always the one that makes the loudest noise. Sometimes, it's the one that makes no sound at all until the moment it decides the war. Ukraine had just proven that silence, properly applied, could be more devastating than any missile, more precise than any bomb, and more terrifying than any conventional threat. The question isn't what happened to that convoy. The question is what happens next when an entire military doctrine realizes it's been fighting the wrong war.